A Japanese sword slashes through the darkness. Blood sprays across tent canvas. And in the next 36 minutes, one American soldier with a rifle will kill 40 enemy troops, saving his entire company from annihilation. May 11, 1945. The Philippines. The war is nearly over, but the killing hasn't stopped. On a remote outpost near Dingalan Bay, Private John McKinney sleeps with his rifle beside him, a habit learned hunting in the Georgia woods. He doesn't know that 100 Japanese soldiers are creeping through the jungle toward his tent. He doesn't know that in moments, a sword will nearly take his life. And he has no idea that what happens next will earn him America's highest military honor. I'm John Donald, and you're watching John Donald, WW2 Records. If you want to discover the untold stories of World War II heroes whose courage defied impossible odds, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. John Randolph McKinney was born on February 26, 1921, in Woodcliff, Screven County, Georgia. His father was a sharecropper. The family had nothing. John attended school through 3rd grade before leaving to work the fields full-time. He learned to hunt before he learned much else, putting food on the table when crops failed. By 12, he could drop a squirrel at 50 yards. The rifle became an extension of his hands. On November 23, 1942, 21-year-old John McKinney walked into Fort McPherson and enlisted in the United States Army. He listed his occupation as farmhand and his education as grammar school. The recruiting officer noted his marksmanship was exceptional. The Army assigned McKinney to Company A, 123rd Infantry Regiment, 33rd Infantry Division. They shipped him to the Pacific Theater in 1943. New Guinea first. Brutal jungle warfare where disease killed as many men as bullets. McKinney survived the malaria, the dysentery, the endless rain, and the Japanese. His company noticed 2 things about the quiet Georgian. He was the best shot they'd ever seen, and he never complained. By 1945, General Douglas MacArthur had returned to the Philippines as promised. American forces were recapturing the islands in a bloody campaign that would cost over 10,000 American lives on Luzon alone. The Japanese refused to surrender. They launched night attacks, dawn raids, suicide charges against American positions. Every outpost was a potential death trap. In May 1945, Company A established a defensive position near Dingalan Bay in Tayabas Province, northern Luzon. The outpost guarded a crucial supply route. The perimeter was small, maybe 100 yards across. A light machine gun emplacement anchored the northeastern approach, manned by 3 soldiers working rotating shifts. After a long shift at that gun, Private McKinney walked a few paces to his tent and lay down to rest. His M1 Garand rifle lay beside him, always beside him. The jungle was quiet. It was 4:47 in the morning. What McKinney didn't know was that Japanese forces had been watching the outpost for days. They had counted the Americans, timed the guard rotations, identified the machine gun as the key to the entire position. And now, over 100 Japanese soldiers were moving through the darkness, swords and bayonets ready, under orders to kill everyone and capture the supplies. The vanguard had already slipped past the outer guard post undetected.
Japanese Sergeant Fukutaro Mori reached McKinney's tent first. His orders were clear: eliminate the first American silently. No gunfire, swords only. By the time the main force attacked, the perimeter would already be breached. Mori could hear the American breathing inside the tent. One quick strike would end this man before he could raise an alarm. At exactly 4:51 a.m., Mori threw open the tent flap. His sword came down in a diagonal slash aimed at McKinney's neck. In the darkness, he misjudged the distance by inches. The blade caught McKinney on the right side of his head, slicing through flesh and cartilage, severing part of his ear. Blood sprayed. Pain exploded through McKinney's skull. His eyes opened to a silhouette standing over him, with a raised sword coming down for a second strike. This one would not miss. McKinney's hand found his rifle in the darkness. Not the trigger, the stock. 24 years of survival instinct took over. He swung the M1 like a club with every ounce of strength he possessed. The rifle butt caught Mori under the chin with enough force to shatter bone. The Japanese sergeant staggered backward. McKinney swung again. The second blow crushed Mori's skull. The sergeant dropped dead at the entrance to the tent. Outside, McKinney could hear them. Dozens of footsteps. Running. Shouting. The crack of rifle fire. The main assault had begun. His ear was bleeding badly. His head rang from the sword's strike. But somewhere in that darkness, nearly 100 Japanese soldiers were coming to kill everyone he knew. McKinney grabbed his rifle, checked the clip, and stepped out of the tent into hell. 30 yards away, muzzle flashes lit up the pre-dawn darkness around the machine gun emplacement. McKinney could see figures swarming over the sandbag wall. His mind processed the tactical situation instantly. That machine gun covered the main approach to the American camp. If the Japanese captured it and turned it around, they could rake the entire perimeter with fire. Every American in Company A would die. The two soldiers who had replaced McKinney at the gun were fighting for their lives. Private James Hendricks took a bayonet wound to the shoulder in the first seconds. His companion made a split-second decision, grabbed the wounded through Hendricks and dragged him toward the rear. It was the right call. Hendricks would have bled out, but it meant the machine gun was now undefended. 10 Japanese infantrymen swarmed into the emplacement before McKinney could get there. One immediately began trying to turn the gun around. The others took up defensive positions, rifles pointed outward, ready to cut down any American counterattack. They had captured the most important weapon in the entire outpost. McKinney didn't slow down, didn't take cover, didn't wait for backup. He charged straight at 10 enemy soldiers who had just taken the key to the battle. 2 of them saw him coming, a single American bleeding from the head, sprinting through the darkness. They raised their rifles. McKinney was faster. He shot the first man at 15 yards, shot the second at 10 yards. By the time he reached the sandbag wall, he had fired 4 rounds and 4 Japanese soldiers were down. McKinney leapt into the gun pit. The space inside was roughly 8 feet by 6 feet. 6 enemy soldiers were still alive in that confined area. Some tried to swing their rifle around. Others reached for bayonets. One was still fumbling with the machine gun's traversing mechanism, trying to turn it on the sleeping Americans. McKinney landed among them and kept firing. Point-blank range, distances measured in inches rather than yards. The M1 Garand held 8 rounds. He had already fired 4. He put the next 3 rounds into 3 more Japanese soldiers at arm's length. 1 round left. The 8th man was directly in front of him, bayonet raised for a thrust at McKinney's chest. McKinney fired his last round. The soldier dropped. The M1's bolt locked back with its distinctive metallic ping. The empty clip ejected automatically. 3 Japanese soldiers were still alive in the pit. They had heard that sound. They knew what it meant. His rifle was empty. The first one lunged. McKinney reversed his grip on the M1 before the empty clip hit the ground. He swung the weapon like an axe. The walnut stock connected with the soldier's temple with a sickening crack. The man collapsed. McKinney swung again. The second soldier tried to block with his forearm. The rifle butt shattered bone and continued into his skull. The third soldier lunged with a bayonet. McKinney sidestepped and brought the rifle down on the back of the man's neck. Vertebrae cracked audibly. 30 seconds after 10, Japanese soldiers captured the machine gun. All 10 lay dead. McKinney grabbed for the machine gun, his hands finding the receiver. Something was wrong. During the struggle, the weapon had been damaged. The bolt was jammed. The feed tray was bent. He tried to cycle it twice. Nothing. The most important weapon in the perimeter was useless. McKinney looked up from the broken machine gun. Dawn was starting to lighten the eastern horizon, and in that gray light he could see them. More Japanese soldiers, many more. They were regrouping at the edge of the jungle, preparing for the next wave. Officers were shouting orders. NCOs were organizing ranks. McKinney had an M1 rifle with an empty magazine. He had just killed 10 men in brutal hand-to-hand combat. His severed ear was still bleeding, soaking through his collar, and the main assault hadn't even started yet. McKinney reached down and pulled ammunition from one of the dead Japanese soldiers. A bandolier of American .30 caliber rounds the man had probably taken from a previous engagement. He loaded a fresh 8-round clip into his rifle with practiced speed. The metallic click as it locked into place was the sweetest sound he'd ever heard. Somewhere in the jungle darkness, a Japanese officer was shouting orders. McKinney couldn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. They were coming again. He settled into the gun pit among the bodies of the men he had just killed, rested his rifle on the sandbag wall, steadied his breathing, and waited. This was no different than waiting for a deer to step into a clearing back in Georgia, except the deer didn't shoot back. The second wave emerged from the jungle 60 yards away. McKinney counted at least 20 soldiers in the first line, more behind them. They came at a run, rifles with fixed bayonets extended, screaming as they charged. McKinney put his front sight on the lead soldier's center mass and squeezed the trigger.
The M1 Garand was designed for rapid semi-automatic fire. A trained soldier could empty an 8-round clip in under 10 seconds with aimed shots. McKinney was not just a trained soldier. He was a hunter from Georgia who had been shooting since childhood. He was faster. The first Japanese soldier dropped at 60 yards. McKinney shifted his aim. The second man fell at 55 yards. Then the third. The M1 kicked against his shoulder with each shot. Brass casings ejected to his right in a steady rhythm. He didn't think about what he was doing. His body remembered thousands of hours in the Georgia woods. Lead the moving target. Squeeze the trigger. Acquire the next target. Repeat. The clip ejected with its characteristic ping. McKinney slammed in a fresh one from the bandolier in less than 2 seconds. The charging wave had covered 20 yards during his reload. They were at 40 yards now. He started firing again. The Japanese soldiers had expected to find a captured machine gun position already in their hands. They had expected their advance guard to be turning that gun on the sleeping Americans. Instead, they found one man with a rifle cutting them down with mechanical precision. 8 rounds. Reload. 8 rounds. Reload. Some of the attackers made it to within 15 yards of the gun pit before McKinney dropped them. Others tried to veer left or right, seeking cover. He tracked them and fired. A moving target was easier to hit than a stationary one. Any hunter knew that. The movement made them predictable. The second wave broke. The survivors scattered back toward the jungle. McKinney counted the bodies in front of his position. 11 more. 21 total since the attack began minutes ago. He didn't have time to feel the relief. Japanese officers were already reorganizing. He could hear them shouting beyond the tree line. Then he heard something else. A hollow thump from somewhere in the jungle. Then another. Knee mortars.
The first mortar round exploded 10 yards to McKinney's left. Dirt and shrapnel sprayed across the gun pit. He flattened himself against the sandbags. The second round hit closer, 5 yards. The third landed directly on the parapet, showering him with debris and torn sandbag material. The Japanese had learned from the first 2 waves. They weren't going to charge blindly into his rifle fire again. They would soften the position with mortars first, kill him or force him to keep his head down, then send in the infantry. McKinney understood the tactical problem immediately. If he stayed in the gun pit, the mortars would eventually find him. The Japanese gunners were adjusting their aim with each shot, walking the rounds closer. But if he moved, he would lose the only fortified position in this section of the perimeter. Another mortar round hit the sandbags directly. The wall partially collapsed. McKinney was now half exposed to rifle fire from the jungle. A grenade landed 3 feet away from him. McKinney grabbed it and threw it back over the sandbags in one fluid motion. It exploded in midair, the blast wave knocking him sideways. His ears were ringing now on top of the wound from the sword. Blood from his severed ear had soaked through the makeshift bandage. He made his decision. Staying meant death. McKinney grabbed 2 bandoliers of ammunition from the dead soldiers around him and ran. Rifle fire cracked from the tree line as the Japanese spotted him moving. Bullets snapped past his head, kicked up dirt at his feet. He sprinted 15 yards to a shallow depression in the ground, not a proper foxhole, just a slight dip in the terrain, offering minimal cover. He threw himself into it and rolled onto his back as a round tore through the air inches above him. McKinney crawled to the edge of the depression and found a firing position. The Japanese infantry was moving again. They thought he was running. They thought he was retreating. 2 squads emerged from the jungle at a fast walk, rifles ready, moving toward the abandoned gun pit. McKinney let them get to 30 yards. Then he opened fire. The attackers had bunched together while crossing the open ground. A fatal mistake. McKinney's first shot dropped the point man. His second hit the soldier directly behind. The group scattered, but there was no cover between the jungle and McKinney's new position. He picked them off as they ran. 8 rounds. Reload. The M1's action worked like a sewing machine in his practiced hands. The survivors who reached the gun pit found only bodies, their comrades from the first wave. They had expected to find the American there. Instead, they discovered him shooting at them from a completely different angle. 3 more fell before they could locate his muzzle flash. McKinney was doing what he had done in the Georgia woods his entire life. Never stay in one place. Never let your prey predict where the next shot will come from. He changed positions again, moving 10 yards to his right, while the Japanese tried to reorganize. Found another slight depression. Started firing from the new location. The Japanese were running in circles now, unable to fix his position, unable to coordinate their attack. Dawn light was spreading across the battlefield. McKinney could see them clearly now. He had been fighting for 18 minutes. His ammunition was running low despite the captured bandoliers, and he could see movement in the jungle that suggested the enemy was massing for another major push. McKinney needed more ammunition. He knew exactly where to find it. The dead Japanese soldiers around the gun pit carried ammunition pouches, grenades, even more American rounds taken as trophies from previous battles. But getting back there meant crossing 30 yards of open ground under fire. He waited for a lull in the mortar bombardment, counted to 3, then sprinted. Rifle fire erupted from the tree line. McKinney ran in a zigzag pattern like a rabbit dodging a hunter, another skill from his Georgia youth. A bullet tugged at his sleeve. Another cracked past his head so close he felt the shock wave. He dove the last 5 feet and landed among the bodies he had created 20 minutes earlier. The smell hit him, blood, cordite, death. McKinney ignored it. He had butchered hogs on the farm, gutted deer in the Georgia summer heat. The smell of death was familiar. He moved quickly through the corpses, grabbing every bandolier, every ammunition pouch, every loose clip. He found 4 American pouches on men who had taken them as trophies. 64 more rounds. He stuffed the clips into his pockets and belt. Then he found 3 Japanese Type 97 fragmentation grenades clipped to a belt. He had never used one before, but he had seen them. Pull the pin, strike the cap against something hard, count to 4, throw. A Japanese soldier appeared over this sandbag wall. He must have crawled forward while McKinney was gathering ammunition. The man's rifle was already coming up. McKinney shot him through the chest at arm's length without thinking. Grabbed the dead man's grenades. 3 more. Movement in his peripheral vision. More soldiers approaching from the left. McKinney armed a grenade, counted, and threw it over the sandbags. The explosion was followed by screaming. McKinney armed a second grenade and threw it towards the tree line where muzzle flash were concentrated. More screaming. More bodies. He was out of the gun pit before the third grenade left his hand, already running to his next position. A shell crater 15 yards away, 3 feet deep, enough to protect him from direct fire. He dove into it as the third grenade detonated behind him. From the crater, he could see the entire killing field. Bodies littered the ground between his position and the trees. He counted quickly, 28, maybe 30 visible dead. Some were still moving, wounded men trying to crawl back toward their lines. McKinney let them go. A wounded man required 2 healthy soldiers to carry him. Every casualty multiplied the enemy's problems. The mortar fire had stopped. McKinney understood why. The Japanese had lost visual contact with him again. Their mortar crews couldn't adjust fire without spotters. He used the brief respite to reload every empty clip he carried. His fingers worked automatically, pressing rounds into clips, feeling for the spring tension. 8 rounds per clip. He had scavenged enough ammunition for approximately 10 reloads, 80 rounds. 80 rounds against however many Japanese soldiers were still in that jungle. 23 minutes. McKinney had killed or wounded at least 30 enemy soldiers. But he knew the math. The Japanese had started with roughly 100 men. Even accounting for his kills, there were still dozens left. And he was still alone. Where was the rest of Company I? The truth was that the Japanese had hit multiple points along the perimeter simultaneously. Other soldiers were fighting their own desperate battles. In the chaos of a pre-dawn attack, there was no coordination, no reinforcements, just individual soldiers fighting to survive. The Japanese regrouped at the jungle edge. McKinney could see them through the trees, soldiers checking weapons, NCOs moving among the ranks, officers studying the American perimeter through binoculars. They had expected to overrun this outpost in 5 minutes. They had lost a third of their force to 1 man in 23 minutes, and they still hadn't broken through. McKinney saw the officer lower his binoculars and gesture toward a different section of the perimeter, not the gun pit, not the craters, but toward the supply tents. A flanking attack, to bypass the killing ground he had created. McKinney climbed out of his crater and ran toward the supply area. He covered 40 yards in 8 seconds and threw himself behind a stack of ammunition crates just as the first Japanese soldiers emerged from the jungle on the southern approach. 12 soldiers moving in tactical column. They were heading for the gap between 2 tents. Once through that gap, they would be inside the American perimeter, with clear shots at soldiers fighting on other fronts. McKinney opened fire from behind the crates. The first 3 men in the column went down before the others could react. The 4th and 5th tried to return fire, but couldn't locate him in the shadows. McKinney shot them both. The remaining 7 scattered. More soldiers were emerging from the tree line. The Japanese commander had committed his reserve to this flanking attack, 20, maybe 25 men. They saw their comrades pinned down and hesitated. That hesitation cost them everything. McKinney fired into the clustered soldiers. 8 rounds. Reload. 8 rounds. Bodies dropped among the trees. The survivors pulled back into deeper cover. 26 minutes. McKinney had now killed or wounded at least 35 enemy soldiers. The Japanese had tried direct assault, mortar bombardment, and flanking maneuver. All 3 had failed against 1 rifleman who refused to die. The Japanese attacked again from two directions, one group from the south, another from the original northeastern approach. They were trying to split McKinney's fire, force him to choose which threat to engage. He engaged both. 4 rounds at the southern group, 2 men down. 4 rounds at the northeastern group, 2 more down. The M1 pinged empty. He reloaded under 3 seconds and fired at the southern group again. Both attacks stalled. Neither group could advance into his accurate rifle fire, but they didn't retreat either. They went to ground and started returning fire. Bullets cracked over McKinney's head, thudded into the wooden crates protecting him. He was taking fire from multiple directions now. His ammunition was running lower. The Japanese had figured out it was one man, not a squad. One rifleman who moved fast and shot straight. They began advancing individually, leapfrogging forward, while others provided covering fire. It was the right tactic to overwhelm a single defender. Eventually, someone would get close enough. The Japanese closed to within 20 yards on the southern approach, 15 yards from the northeast. McKinney's rifle was hot from sustained fire. He had fewer than 30 rounds remaining. The position that had protected him was about to become a trap. Then he heard it. American voices shouting behind him, boots pounding on dirt, rifle fire from a new direction. Soldiers from Company A's 2nd Platoon had finally fought through to his section of the line. They had been engaged on the western perimeter, and it took them over 30 minutes to push through to McKinney's position. The Japanese broke, caught between McKinney's deadly accurate fire and the arriving reinforcements. The survivors retreated into the jungle. Some didn't make it. McKinney dropped 2 more as they ran, then silence. No more rifle fire, no more mortar rounds, no more shouting, just the moans of wounded men and the ringing in McKinney's ears.
36 minutes after Sergeant Fukutaro Mori slashed open his tent, Private John McKinney lowered his rifle. He was still standing, still breathing, still in control of the area. The platoon sergeant who reached him stopped and stared. McKinney was covered in blood, most of it his own from the sword wound. His uniform was torn in a dozen places. His face was blackened with powder burns and dirt. He looked like a man who had fought through the gates of hell. Behind McKinney, the battlefield told a story the sergeant could barely comprehend. Bodies lay scattered across 100 yards, around the machine gun pit, in the shell craters, near the supply tents, sprawled in the open ground between the tree line and the perimeter. The sergeant ordered a count. His men moved through the killing field, checking bodies, marking positions. The count took 20 minutes. When they finished, the sergeant didn't believe the number. He ordered them to count again. 38 dead Japanese soldiers lay in the immediate vicinity of the machine gun position. 2 more bodies were found near the mortar emplacement 45 yards away. 40 confirmed kills. 1 man. 36 minutes. The math was almost impossible to believe. That was more than 1 enemy soldier killed every 56 seconds for over half an hour. Most of them killed with aimed rifle fire. Several in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The sergeant asked McKinney what happened. The private gave a brief account. The tent, the sword, the machine gun, the waves of attackers. He spoke in short sentences. No embellishment, no drama, just facts. The sergeant looked at the bodies, looked at McKinney, looked at the single damaged M1 Garand the private was holding. No squad, no machine gun support, no reinforcements. Just one rifleman from Georgia who refused to let his company die. Company A's commanding officer forwarded a report to battalion headquarters, recommending Private McKinney for the Medal of Honor. The recommendation moved up the chain, battalion to regiment, regiment to division, division to the War Department. At each level, officers read the account and assumed it was exaggerated. Combat reports often inflated numbers. Soldiers under stress made mistakes. The 33rd Infantry Division sent an intelligence team to verify the report. They interviewed McKinney, interviewed witnesses, examined the battlefield, counted the bodies again. They reached an unavoidable conclusion. The report was accurate. Every detail supported by evidence. On January 23, 1946, Private John McKinney stood in the White House. President Harry S. Truman placed a Medal of Honor around his neck. The citation described his actions in formal military language. Extreme gallantry, unsurpassed intrepidity, single-handedly thwarting an assault that threatened to annihilate his company. McKinney was promoted to sergeant. When reporters asked about the battle, he gave the same brief answers. He didn't seek publicity. He told them, everybody in the infantry should get one. The infantry had it roughest of all. After the war, Sergeant John McKinney returned to Screven County, Georgia. He went back to farming, hunting, fishing in the same woods where he had learned to shoot as a boy. He rarely spoke about the war. When people asked about Luzon, he would say a few words and change the subject. He declined most military functions and ceremonies. The war had followed him home in ways no medal could address, but he dealt with it the way most veterans of his generation did. He kept working, kept living, kept moving forward. Forrest Bryant Johnson spent years researching McKinney's story and published Phantom Warrior in 2007, bringing renewed attention to a hero most Americans had never heard of. McKinney died on April 4, 1997, in Sylvania, Georgia, at age 76. He was buried at Double Heads Baptist Church Cemetery, not far from the land where he learned to hunt. In 2017, the state of Georgia renamed a highway in Screven County the John R. McKinney Medal of Honor Highway. A sign stands today. Most drivers pass it without knowing the story behind the name.